Hi everybody, it's Julie. Welcome to Hello Monday. Today I'm going to be doing some easy watercoloring with the Zig Clean Color Real Brush Markers, and I'm also going to be working with a brand new set by Brandy Kincaid for the Essentials by Ellen line. She's called the Bookworm Lady. She's got a lot of fun components, and also there are coordinating dies to go with. And I'm going to start by putting some 140-pound Canson watercolor paper into my Mini Misty. I've already cut it to size, so it's 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And I'm going to be working on the smooth side. I'm just going to pull some images from the set that I wanted to work with, give them enough space so when I die cut them, I've got the room to do that. Close the lid and get them all mounted, and then because I'm going to be doing some heat embossing, I'm going to prep the surface of that paper with an anti-static pouch. And the reason I'm doing that is I want the embossing powder just to stick to the areas where the pigment ink gets put down. And I did blow off the excess because that pouch for some reason is putting out a lot of powder, excess powder. So I just blew it off, and then I'm ready to ink up my images over here. So I'm using VersaFine Clair pigment ink. This is the pine cone color, which is a nice rich brown. And I'm kind of fastidious about my inking. You know, there's overachievers and then there's over inkers. I'm an over inker. So now I've got everything stamped there, and I wanted to add one more element. I'm going to grab her glasses and get those mounted separately onto a little acrylic block, and then I'll ink that up and stamp those right into place right over her face. I didn't see a reason for this particular card to actually die cut those out, so I'm just going to stamp them right on her face. And then I'm going to take it over to my little coffee filter here and pour some Wow embossing powder. This is a clear, super fine embossing powder, and then I need to move those out of the path of my heat gun because we all know what happens when the airflow hits the embossing powder and we have a hot mess on our hands. Raise your hand if you've been there. I know you have. So now I'm going to heat everything up. I did preheat the heat gun for about 30 seconds. And then I'm just going to pass this over. You just want to get close enough to watch the powder melt and then move on to the next area. You just want to make sure there are no grains of embossing powder left. And I like to tilt my paper in the light there just to make sure that every area there is nice and shiny and raised. So now that that's cool, I'm ready to move on to the coloring. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the Zig Clean Color Real Brush Markers. These are an unusual marker. It's kind of funny that they call them markers because they're more like color in a paintbrush. It's like a paintbrush pen, right? So it has real bristle brushes, and they're not, it's not like a marker tip, a felt tip that you can press really hard on. You'll smash these if you press really hard against the paper. And so you want to wield it kind of like you would a paintbrush. Okay, so it's like a paintbrush in a pen format. And when you're applying your color, just make sure you're giving gentle strokes and not smashing it into the paper. Now, one reason why I like to heat emboss my images is it acts kind of like a reservoir for the color. So I'm going to take my brush markers and I'm actually going to go towards the embossing lines. I'm not trying to fill in my images. I'm actually trying to hug the embossing lines with the tip of my brush pen here with the color. So I'm laying down color. It's going to hold that color there and allow me to just continue. I'm going to go ahead and lay color down for every image that I want to watercolor. And you'll notice that I am not filling those images in. Now with lighter colors, you may want to get a little bit more color on the watercolor paper. But with darker images, I've learned that a little goes a long way with these particular markers. So I'm just going to stick closer to the embossing lines with the darker colors. And then once I have all the color loaded on there, I know it sounds kind of funny, but it works the best this way for me. And that's why I like to emboss the images. So now I'm going to grab my Pentel Aquash. This is a water brush. It has a water reservoir. So you don't need a jar of water, but you could use that and a regular paintbrush or watercolor brush if you wanted to. And then I'm just going to go along where I laid down that color, and I'm going to pull the color away from the embossing lines to color in my image. And this is a really great way, easy way to get awesome watercolor effects. And just keep some paper towel handy, because when you switch areas, you want to make sure you're not contaminating that area. You know, if you're using brown, you don't want to contaminate the green, etc., etc. So make sure you clean off your brush whenever you have to switch areas or switch colors. And you'll notice here that I'm just pulling that color out and allowing it to remain darker towards the areas where I first laid it down, and then I'm going to let it fade out as I pull away. And if you need to add more color, you can certainly do that. But you want to make sure that the watercolor paper or the paint is dry. And then you can come back and add more color with the markers and then pull it out again with your water brush. And the reason why you want to let that dry completely is if the surface is wet, what happens to your Zig Clean Color brush is that when it goes over a wet surface, that brush tip actually acts as a wick, and it will wick water up into the barrel and diffuse and dilute the color that's in the barrel. And you really don't want that to happen. So you want to be always laying down color with these on a dry surface to get the best effects and to make sure your markers stay in really good condition. Now I'm going around some of the areas where I went outside the lines and got a little sloppy, and I just laid down some clean water and then dabbed it up with my paper towel. So anytime that happens, that's just a great way to kind of clean up your mess outside the lines. So once I'm done with this, I just wanted to show you a little bit close up here how pretty that looks, how painterly it looks. I love that effect. I'm going to set it aside to dry, and then I'll die cut everything out. Now I'm working on my base card. This is a craft cardstock, and I've gone ahead and prepped it with anti-static pouch beforehand and blew off the excess. And now I've taken that stack of books image, I cleaned it off thoroughly, and I'm inking up with Versamark ink. And I'm going to flip the image up and down. I'm going to rotate it as I'm stamping to create a stack of books because I wanted it to have a more random look than if I just stamped it the same direction every time. So I kind of rotated it every impression I made. And so it looks like I've got 3 stacks or piles of books there. And then I'm going to stamp a sentiment with that pinecone ink right over the top. And because these are all pigment inks, even the Versamark is a pigment ink because it's sticky and it's just not colored and it's clear. So then I can stamp with pigment ink over the top, and then I can apply clear embossing powder over everything. And then I'm going to come back in with my heat gun, again preheating for about 30 seconds, and then I'm just going to come in there and melt everything, and you can see what's happening. So those images there that were stamped with the Versamark, it's allowing the color of the paper to show through, but it intensifies it a shade darker than what the true color of the paper is, and that's fun to do with the Versamark ink. It's called a Watermark ink as well. And then I took all my images, they're all die cut, and I put some foam tape on the back of them all, and I'm just going to start mounting everything. And I'm using my tweezers here because sometimes my fingers get in the way and I can't really see what I'm doing. So now I've got that mounted in place, and then it occurred to me that I forgot to pop out her arm. I want her arm to hold something, and the die actually accommodates that because it has a special cutting line that goes around her arm, but I forgot to pop it out, so I had to take my X-Acto knife and get under there in between those cut lines and pop her arm up. So now I'm going to take a book that I had stamped and watercolored, and I've got it mounted with some foam tape, and I bent it just a little bit to give it a little bit more dimension, and then I'm going to tuck that under her arm there. And I only put the foam tape on one side of it because I really only need it to pop up on that side, and the other side can lay flush, but it does give extra dimension to that layer there. And then I can go ahead and pop everything else into place, and I've got this really fun background that's very subtle with my really cute girl. And I didn't color her because I think she really pops out when you just leave her uncolored. It's a fun and different look, another way to add color to your images without going too crazy. If you enjoyed today's video, please give us a thumbs up, and thanks for watching.